Good evening and welcome to this KATV Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall, live on KATV.com, the KATV Facebook page, and TalkBusiness.net. This week we are opening our studio to the candidates for governor of Arkansas to discuss one of the critical issues confronting our state, how to build and maintain a world-class system of education for our children. We have invited all the candidates for governor from both parties to join us. On Thursday, we'll hear from the Democrats, but up first, the Republicans, or in this case, Republican. Sarah Huckabee Sanders declined our invitation to participate in tonight's event, but her opponent in the GOP primary accepted, and so tonight the hour is hers. She, of course, is Arkansas's first female and first Republican Attorney General, who famously describes herself as a proud Christian, pro-life, gun-carrying, conservative mama. Leslie Rutledge joins us tonight. We welcome you. We thank you for being here tonight. The Attorney General will be fielding questions from our viewers, from me, and from Roby Brock, the host of Talk Business and Politics. But before we get to those questions, Attorney General Rutledge, you have 2 minutes to directly address the voters of Arkansas.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Roby, and thank you to KATV for providing this incredible format for us to talk about the #1 issue in the state of Arkansas, and that's education for our young people. I'm the product of public school education. I went to K through 12 at Southside in Independence County, where my mother taught elementary special education for 34 years. And I went to University of Arkansas at Fayetteville and then on to law school in Little Rock. I think every child deserves to have a first-class education. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, is what we can do to make Arkansas first in education. Unfortunately, I'm the only Republican candidate who bothered to show up tonight to talk about the #1 issue. Even the Supreme Court in Lakeview v. Huckabee told us that education funding is a #1 priority in Arkansas. It's a #1 priority for me to take care of the students of Arkansas. I'm excited to talk about how we're going to have more workforce education. So that way kids who don't go to college can go straight into the workforce so they can take care of themselves and their family. More choice for parents. More opportunities for students when they leave school. And talk about teachers. As you already heard, my mom was an elementary special ed teacher for 34 years. I've got a soft spot for them because I know the impact that teachers make on children's lives and the impact that they make on the state of Arkansas. COVID has brought many challenges to each of us as we're keeping kids in the classroom, and that's of utmost importance. It shouldn't matter what your parents' zip code is. It shouldn't matter how much your parents make. Every child deserves to have that first-class education. That's why I'm excited to be here to hear from Arkansans, because I believe, as the Attorney General, I make decisions every single day on behalf of all 3 million plus Arkansans for the last 7 years. And as governor, I will do the same and fight for you and for your child. That's why I'm here to talk about education. I'm here in person. You can ask me questions. You can see me at any time. But I believe it's important, if you're going to be the governor of Arkansas, you need to be here in Arkansas answering questions, talking about issues that matter.
Okay, Attorney General Rutledge, we're going to take you up on that offer right now. So, Roby, why don't you kick off our questions and, more importantly, her answers.
First of all, General, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate this. It is important, I think, for voters to understand where folks stand on the issues, particularly when 70% of the state budget deals with education. Right now, we're going to talk about a few COVID-related questions. You're leading the defense of Act 1002 that the state legislature passed, which banned mask mandates. Right now there's an injunction against that. There'll be a court hearing on that. You're going to be defending that state law. I guess my question to you is, are you defending that law because you're obligated as Attorney General to defend the laws of the state of Arkansas? Or do you feel differently personally? If you were governor, would you have a different position than what you do as AG?
Well, thank you, Roby, for the question, because this has been a challenge for schools across the state in our 262 school districts. They're figuring out whether or not they're going to require masks or not require masks with that injunction in place. Yes, I do have a responsibility as the Attorney General to defend the laws of the state of Arkansas. And that's why I want to make sure that I am defending the laws, just as I've done for the last 6.5, 7 years, making those tough decisions. And the law in Arkansas, as passed by our legislature this spring, as signed by Governor Hutchinson this spring, is that we are going to prohibit mask mandates. Unfortunately, when Judge Fox recently put a hold on that law, schools are not able to do so. So I'm defending it as the Attorney General. And we've seen that some schools, 118 I believe, have decided to go ahead and to require masks in schools while others have not. But it's also important for Arkansans to understand, to talk to school administrators. I've heard from school administrators who've told me, they said, Leslie, you know, we've got kids in school, we want to protect them, but we also have to have teachers and school personnel. So what the Department of Health has said is that if kids are masked, if adults are masked, and they're sitting within 3 feet of each other, they don't have to quarantine if someone in the classroom is positive for COVID. However, if they're not masked, all the adults and all those kids in that room will have to quarantine, and we're running out of school personnel. So yes, we want to keep kids safe in the classroom, but we also have to make sure that we have the school personnel to teach those kids and to take care of them.
So do you support the mask mandate that you see 118 school districts actually participating in now?
Well, I think those schools are making the decisions based on what they believe is right for their school districts, and that's where local control is so important. However, it is a violation of the law, and I'm defending that law. That's one of the tough decisions that I've been making as to whether or not we defend that law, and it's my responsibility as the Attorney General to do so. I don't believe that people should be required, to get the vaccination. And that's one thing that I've talked about publicly, that I've promoted, is to talk to your doctor. But I also think it's important as we look at our school children to protect them and to allow those school superintendents and the school boards, the local school boards, to make that decision.
So let me just ask one more question for
Sure.
clarity, and then I'll throw over to Chris here. So if you were governor, would you have a different position than you have as Attorney General? Governor Hutchinson has taken a different position than the law that he signed. Would you have a different position?
And so Governor Hutchinson's taken a different position from the position that Governor Hutchinson had.
Right,
So that's what's very confusing to us. And so,
But what would you
my
do as
client
governor?
has changed his mind. And, as governor, I think that, at the time when they were looking at that data, it's easy for me to armchair quarterback this. At the time they were looking at the data, and the legislators made that decision because, unfortunately, we were seeing across the state and across the country people were required to wear masks. I don't think that people should be required to wear masks. Our numbers have been as high as they have ever been, and they were high last summer. They were high in January when we were requiring masks in businesses and across the state. I'm no scientist. I'm an English major turned lawyer, Roby, but I do believe that it's my responsibility as the Attorney General to uphold and defend that law that was passed by our legislature and signed into law by the governor.
Nothing wrong with English majors. I'm just saying.
Absolutely.
There's 2 of them at this table,
But
Chris.
some of us are public schools.
Well, we know, Attorney General Rutledge, that the children under 12 cannot be vaccinated, and that's generally the 6th grade and younger. What we have heard in our reporting from a lot of parents is they will say, I'm going to have my child wear a mask in school, but their concern is that if other children aren't wearing masks, then that makes the environment less safe. What would you say to those parents who have those concerns for their children?
Well, I don't fault a parent at all for having concerns for their children and wanting their child to be in a safe environment. That we want all kids to be in that safe environment, to be able to pick a school. I think now, over the last 18 months, Chris, is an opportunity for us to open up more school choice in Arkansas. That parents should be able to say, you know what, this school is not working out for my child. I need to look at other opportunities for my child to be able to learn and to be in that safe environment. So I don't fault these parents at all, and I don't fault the school boards for making the decision. But they have to understand that our position as the state is that we have a law in place that says that you cannot have a forced individuals, whether it's a government entity, in order to have masks. And so that's my position as the Attorney General, is that I am enforcing this law on behalf of the state of Arkansas. I've got a 3-year-old baby girl, Chris, and I know that in a couple of years, hopefully we're going to be on the backside of this pandemic. And that's why, as we are walking through it, those of us in state leadership position are making these decisions, and hopefully we're going to be on the backside of this pandemic by then. But as I'm looking at schools for my kid, I have to think about those sort of questions. What kind of education would she get? What other students, because we want to make sure that our child has the best education and is in a safe environment.
Okay, so no to mask mandates, but you also say no to vaccine mandates as well. New York City today announced that vaccines will now be required for all school staff in that city. They joined Chicago, Los Angeles, and Washington State. I understand your position that people shouldn't be required to be vaccinated, but what about school workers? Should they be required to be vaccinated with a vaccine that is now fully approved by the FDA?
Well, and we just learned today that the Pfizer vaccine is approved by the FDA, and I think it's important for people to talk to their doctor. That's why I launched a public service announcement as the Attorney General, encouraging people to talk to their physicians about getting the vaccine. It should not be mandated if it is by employers, those are private employers, but we're talking about government entities, school districts requiring school personnel to have that vaccine. I think that's a very dangerous road to go down in order to force individuals to have their health care determined by where they work, and particularly if it's a government entity. And so I would discourage that. But I do think that people need to talk to their doctor. They need to discuss whether or not they should get the vaccine, because as I've said in my public service announcements, over 90% of the people who have died from COVID did not have the vaccine. I have spoken personally in the last 2 weeks at 2 funerals of individuals who were in their 50s who died of COVID and did not have the vaccine. So I implore Arkansans, talk to your doctor. If you were diabetic, you would talk to your doctor. If you had your knee blown out, you would talk to your doctor. This is about your health, and this is about Arkansas and the future of our great state.
The alternative for parents who have concerns about their children being in school and possibly being exposed to COVID is virtual learning. We've got about a year and a half of experience with virtual learning here. Based on what you've seen, do you think that virtual learning serves Arkansas children well?
Well, Chris, I've talked to so many parents, and virtual learning is a challenge. It's a challenge for many students, not only because it's not in person, they're not getting the interaction with their teachers, with other students, not having that social interaction, but also because they don't have access to broadband. One thing that I hear as I travel across the state, and I personally experience, because I go to all 75 counties each year, is that lack of access to rural broadband. And that so many parents, even before the pandemic, were having to drive their kids and park in the McDonald's parking lot or park in the school parking lot in order to do homework. That should not be the case. And so for a child who's already disadvantaged because they're not in front of that teacher, they're not being seen every day, the virtual learning is challenging because now the parents are having to go somewhere where there are hot spots to get access to it, but they're also not being seen by those teachers. In addition to the learning, many of our school children, 65% of Arkansas public school students are on free or reduced lunches. That means many of our school children are in poverty. Many of our school children get 2 meals a day, and that's their breakfast and lunch that they receive at our schools. And so for those kids who are learning virtually, they're hungry, and they're also potentially in dangerous situations with adults who don't love them as they should. So in addition to the threat of the pandemic and the threat of being exposed to COVID, now these children are at home, and they're at home with adults who are dangerous. They're at home with adults who are not ensuring that they have proper meals. They're at home with other kids perhaps that are dangerous, and we have the opioid epidemic, prescription drugs. All of these things are impacting our students and their ability to learn.
The preference is to be in the classroom.
Absolutely.
I'm going to paraphrase a question from a viewer that sent this in when they saw that we were having this town hall. This is a father of an 18-month-old whose child is too young to receive a COVID vaccine or keep a mask on. He worries about his child's safety when he takes him out in public. His question is basically, why has mask wearing become such a partisan, divisive issue? So I guess maybe speak a little bit more broadly about why do we seem to have this big divide over masks?
I don't understand either. And so, to that parent that's asking the question, my daughter, like I said, is 3 years old, and he's got an 18-month-old, and I traveled with our daughter last year at the beginning of the pandemic around the state and would be places, and they're constantly wanting to touch things and put their hands in their mouth. So I understand the concern as a parent, and what this gentleman is asking. As far as I'm concerned, it's not a Democrat-Republican issue in mask. That it should be, are masks actually working? And if they're not working, why are we wearing them? And that's what we have to ask. And unfortunately, if everyone doesn't wear them, they don't seem to be working. We see numerous people, and particularly kids, that wear the same mask over and over and over. I even know, as you can probably tell, gentlemen and viewers, I wear makeup, particularly when I'm on television.
Hey, so does
not necessarily
May, so.
not necessarily at home when I'm at home by myself. I don't wear a mask or makeup. But but we see the dirt that you get on them, and so we really I think that's where the divide is. It's not a Democrat or Republican issue, and it never should be. Nothing that we decide in government should be Democrat and Republican. It should be about what is best for the people of Arkansas. I was criticized quite a bit because, as you may remember, for not wearing a mask at times in photographs. But I use a lot of hand sanitizer. I take care of myself. I make sure my family has access to all the information from our doctors about the vaccine. That's, to me, is important. And so to those who think this is a Democrat or Republican issue, it's not. It's a human issue. It's an Arkansas issue. And that's why I'm here weighing in on it, because I believe as the next governor of Arkansas, it's important to answer questions from folks just like this gentleman.
You kind of alluded to it earlier, and that you said we still have these spikes in cases despite people not wearing masks. Do you believe masks work?
Well, again, Robbie, I don't think that we have any data in front of us that show us over the last 18 months, because while we had masks being mandated and required up until this spring, our last biggest peak was in January of 2021. We have now surpassed that since then with the new Delta variant. However, people were not wearing masks. You'd go in different parts of Arkansas and more populated areas. In Little Rock, you'd go into a restaurant and everyone wear a mask, or into Walmart. I'm a good Walmart shopper, a good Kroger shopper. And you would go in those places, and some parts of the state, they would all have on masks, other parts they wouldn't. And so I think it's very challenging for people who are not going to wear it to do so, and for others not to do so. That I'm not a scientist, but what I do know is that the numbers on the vaccine, what the numbers on the vaccine are telling us, and that's why I encourage people to talk to their doctor.
Well, we do know that there are students who have fallen behind as a result of COVID. How would your administration, identify those children? What would be your plan for helping them catch up and move forward? And how would you commit to measuring their improvement over time?
Well, so many Arkansas students, as we talked about earlier, Chris, are at a disadvantage because they don't have access to broadband. And even if they do, they don't have access to an adult that loves and cares about them and is tending to their needs, whether it's nutritional needs or educational and emotional mental health needs. And to those kids, we're going to be able to identify them pretty quick. And those, when they got back in school this past week, I can assure you those teachers, they know exactly the children that were at high risk because, again, 65% of them are on free and reduced lunches. They know the children that were already struggling, and these teachers are reaching out across the state, doing everything they can to help these kids. But you have parents, even the most affluent parents or educated parents, looking at math and thinking, why are we no longer carrying the one? And that seems silly, but teaching math now is different than what you and I perhaps learned it, and certainly what Roby here, how he learned math.
Wow.
But it's important that we understand and that we appreciate that there are students that have been at a great disadvantage. Some have flourished, but some have been at a great disadvantage, and we have to make sure that we're getting those kids the help that they need. And this is across Arkansas. Arkansas, we're such a rural state, and I love it because it's an agriculture state, but we are rural, and access to broadband has really put these kids at a disadvantage. And the lack of an responsible adult in the home, because those parents need to be working, and they're providing for those kids.
I do wonder, you've had a year and 6 months or so to watch Governor Hutchinson lead the state through this pandemic. Broadly speaking, beyond just education, how would you grade his performance, and what, if anything, would a Governor Rutledge have done differently over these past 18 months?
Well, again, it's easy to be an armchair quarterback, but I have been working very closely with our governor, and there have been times where we have disagreed, but he is, after all, my client. And so oftentimes when I would disagree with the governor on matters, I would express those in our attorney-client conversations, if you will. But at all times, as a leader of the state, I was involved in the conversations. We were defending when Governor Hutchinson on the prohibition of surgeries, for example, that kept a lot of abortion clinics from operating in Arkansas because they were considered an elective surgery. We were immediately sued, and because of my work as the Attorney General, we were able to keep that prohibition on elective surgeries in place for a time being. That was something that was very important to the people of the state of Arkansas. Each time that we walked along, I was making the decision, meeting with my team, meeting with the governor and his team throughout this pandemic. I certainly disagreed with the governor on the statewide mask mandate. I was surprised and disappointed, as were many Arkansans, that he would implement one. I was.
So you would not have done that at any point during the pandemic? You would not have implemented a statewide mask mandate?
No, and I had expressed that. However, I remember when it came the statewide mask mandate, we were made aware of it on Thursday, and on that next Friday, the following day, I was speaking at a law enforcement rally in Harrison. This was a Back the Blue rally, and it was outside, and there were several hundred people at this rally, and my team and I were the only ones in mask at this rally, and so I sent word to Governor Hutchinson and said, I believe everyone's waiting on Monday to start wearing masks. Now, granted, it was an outside event, but people in more rural parts of Arkansas in particular had not been wearing masks. It was only in the more densely populated areas such as Little Rock and Northwest Arkansas where you saw a large amount of people actively wearing masks. And so I had always had concerns about a statewide mask mandate. Closing down businesses, that hurt our economy. Who am I to tell a restaurant? We see restaurants even in downtown Little Rock, but certainly across the state, that are suffering because they had so many people that were not able to come back to work. Once they close those restaurants, you can't keep a restaurant open on 33% people in business, and not everyone could do a drive-through pickup. And so we had wait staff, bar hops, bus boys who were not jobs. They weren't able to get jobs. They lost the business, and then they were getting federal money and unemployment money, and that extra $300. Well, turns out those people don't want to come back to work now. And so our restaurants, our hospitality industry is hurting, our hotel industry hurting. So many industries were hurting because someone told them that their job was not essential. And it was essential to those families to pay their bills and to take care of their kids. And that's why these kids that we're talking about in this education forum is so important. So you don't have to wonder what Leslie Rutledge for governor would do, because you've seen what Leslie Rutledge has done for the last 7 years as the Attorney General.
Okay, sounds like you would have handled things very differently.
All right, let's take a commercial break
and
come back with some hardcore K through 12 policy questions. So.
That's next. Stay with us.
Dreams start glowing. You best be ready. Heartbeat steady, cause the air gets heavy. The game is here. No time for fear. Can you hear the cheers?
Friday Night Touchdowns, sponsored by Baptist Health Orthopedic Center.
Well, you take a lot of pieces to a puzzle. That's the models. But the forecast is something totally different.
Barry and I will be sitting in the Weather Center, and we'll look at the computer models. Wait, we've seen this before. This computer model is not right. Let's follow this one over here because this has happened before.
After you've seen that a number of times, you get an idea of what's going to be severe, what we really need to be concerned about.
And that's what we do here at Channel 7. We mix that experience when we analyze all the model data.
Channel 7 News is Arkansas's #1 online source for news and weather, and your business could be just one click away. Harness the power and extraordinary reach of KATV.com, KATV Mobile, and KATV Social with precision targeting, delivering your message to your potential buyers. KATV Digital, targeted, interactive, and efficient. Contact us today and watch your business grow.
Oh, welcome back. This is our Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall with GOP candidate for Arkansas Governor, Attorney General Leslie Rutledge. Her primary opponent, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, declined to participate in tonight's event. We'll host the Democrats on Thursday night. We now shift our focus to K through 12 education in Arkansas. Roby, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, Governor Hutchinson will be remembered. I think he instituted this from day one in his administration, advancing computer science in Arkansas. There's been a tremendous amount of success with that in Arkansas high schools and even filtering lower than that. If you're elected governor, what are you going to pick up on a new initiative that might be a signature issue for Leslie Rutledge?
Well, certainly, and I think a new initiative is going back to the basics. As I've traveled around the state and as we've seen, Roby, that more kids are needing those workforce skills, so that way they can leave high school and go directly into the workforce. There used to be a train of thought, if you will, that said, you either go to college or go to jail. Well, what a terrible education plan for Arkansas students to be on. We have students that we need to go into HVAC and machinists and mechanics and engineering, electricians, nurses. And so we need to be training and working with local industries. And so we're going to do a huge push in a Governor Rutledge administration to have workforce education, particularly in parts of the state that are struggling. When we look at Little Rock and Northwest Arkansas and Jonesboro, where we've had growth, we have good schools across the state, but we need schools that are producing good workers and college students. And so I would love to see us partner more in the Delta of Arkansas. We've heard for years people talk about what they're going to do for the Delta, but if the people in the Delta are looking for an advocate, they need to look no further than right here in Leslie Rutledge, because we need to have jobs there. And jobs come when you have a great workforce and an educated workforce. We also need to expand businesses to partner with that workforce. I've had the opportunity to tour and visit University of Arkansas at Morrilton, as well as ASU Mid-South and West Memphis. Great workforce training. And certainly if your AC's gone out, you know the importance of an HVAC tech.
I know that, but there are a lot of those business workforce partnerships already in existence right now. Are you going to do something different? Are you going to add more money to that program? Are you going to do something that I guess is different than what is happening right now?
Well, I think that we need to look at our education plan and Department of Ed and to work with the 135 legislators to set the policy. What are we really asking schools to teach? Because when I look at the rate of graduation being 86%, which seems very good, but unfortunately at 8th grade levels, we're 29% proficient in math and 25% in reading, or vice versa, but it's less than 30% proficient in reading and math at the 8th grade level, yet we're graduating 86%, which tells me, you know, even as an English major, the math doesn't quite add up. Something's missing in it, and we need to make sure that kids are leaving high school to get a job. So it needs to be more of a statewide push instead of a one-off like we're seeing in Saline County, like we're seeing in these various areas. And we also need to go back to a values-added education.
All right, just real quick one on that topic.
Sure.
Would you continue Governor Hutchinson's computer science initiative?
Well, I think it's been tremendously successful. I've had a friend of mine who's a school personnel in the West Memphis, Marion area tell me that his son went to college on a computer coding scholarship, would never have been interested in it but for Governor Hutchinson's initiative. And so governors can make a huge impact on education, and that's why it's important for a governor and someone wanting to be governor to be here. Why my friend Sarah is silent on the #1 issue facing Arkansans is beyond me. I know that as the parent of a 3-year-old, I want to know what the next governor of Arkansas will put as a priority in education. I don't want to hear a soundbite or read a tweet. I want to be able to talk and ask questions, because I am not going to leave my daughter's future and the future of the state of Arkansas in the hands of somebody who sits around silently.
The Department of Education has been working the past several years on programs like RISE, which is the Reading Initiative, and professional learning communities where teachers collaborate and share best practices among schools. These have been very successful programs, but they've also required quite a bit of investment as well. As governor, how would you ensure continuity in programs like that, and what would be your priorities for investing and funding Arkansas education?
Well, I think it's important to have these great ideas, Chris, and to collaborate. However, we need to, I watched my mom, who again taught elementary special ed for 34 years. Then I had a great aunt who taught in public schools for 40 years. And when the two of them would get together, they would talk about a program, and my great aunt would say, "Oh yes, we used to call that such and such." And so we are continuously reinventing the wheel. And we need to see what those best practices are and to make sure that we're teaching those best practices. While there may not be a one-size-fits-all, we need to empower our great teachers, but at the same time, not all good ideas are great ideas, and the best ideas are the ones that are effective, most effective with children, because we know they're learning, because they're able to read, they're able to write, they're able to go out and get a job and balance a checkbook. That's how we're able to determine success. And to ensure that funding, while 70% of general revenue goes to public school funding, we're going to be looking for ways to trim excess in state government. For far too long and far too many administrations, and particularly with a supermajority Republican legislature, I'm ready to get to work with those legislators and say, let's trim the fat off state government, that our kids need to have funding. The Supreme Court has told us again in that state Lakeview v. Huckabee, and this is the case where the Supreme Court said public school funding is the #1 priority for the state. And that's when, if you all will remember, Governor Huckabee said, let's consolidate all these schools in Arkansas. There were 300 plus schools in the state of Arkansas, and he wanted to consolidate and make it 1,500 students or less. Well, that would have eliminated all but right around 100 schools. The legislature and they worked together now, and then it became 350 students or less, a much more reasonable. So we didn't have kids on buses for an hour and a half to 2 hours every single day. Public school funding is a priority by law, but it should be a priority for each and every one of us. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. What we need to do is get back to values-added education. And that's why some of those things that I pushed for in this legislative session, Chris, putting American values back in schools. 2 bills that General Mark Berry, who's in state legislature, 3-star general, former adjutant general of the Army Guard, who's actually my campaign chairman, he carried these bills for me, but one required a moment of silence in our public schools every day after kids recited the Pledge of Allegiance. And this is a moment of silence where kids could be quiet, where they could meditate, or they could even pray in our public schools. The second piece of that required singing the Star-Spangled Banner, or playing the Star-Spangled Banner before every major sporting event in a public school. We all remember growing up having values and education. That's what we have to get back to. It's not enough that kids are, because they're not getting it at home, they're not getting it in churches. And I'm not saying that we have to push the kind of church where I grew up, but we do need to add values back to these young people's lives so they will value education.
Let me ask you this. You have signed on to the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, which is a promise not to raise taxes as governor. You want to eliminate the income tax in Arkansas if you're elected. How can Arkansans be confident that your commitment to smaller government won't eventually catch up with the funding needs of Arkansas's education system?
Well, that's where I'm going to work very closely with our legislators. There's 135 legislators that are going to be weighing in on this policy. My plan, the Rutledge plan to eliminate the personal income tax, is not an immediate elimination, but rather over an 8-year period from 23 through the end of 2030 to phase out the personal income tax, which would allow us 4 legislative sessions to ensure that we're able to cut where we need to cut. For decades, we've seen government grow at an exponential rate, and it's time for us to stop growing government and to instead grow jobs, grow educational opportunities. And so, yes, while I have signed that pledge and that we will not increase taxes while I am governor of the state of Arkansas, and that we're going to eliminate the personal income tax, but by law, and we are going to make sure that public school funding is the #1 priority.
Let me interject here because the math doesn't add up for me, the English major, on this one. If you cut the income tax in 8 years, that's 50% of general revenues. That's $3 billion of the state's $6 billion budget. Education is 70% of that $6 billion. You can't keep funding at education at the levels that it's at and take $3 billion out of state government. I mean, you have to eliminate half of the schools in the state of Arkansas, half of the prisons in the state of Arkansas, and half of the nursing homes in the state of Arkansas to get $3 billion out of a $6 billion budget in 8 years. I mean, that you'd have to cut 20% a year over the next 4 years. You know, the math just doesn't add up to me.
Well, it doesn't add up right now because we haven't even started working on it. And so I don't know where you're getting your math, Roby, other than yes. I mean, no. I know the general revenue, but I'm saying that as we move it out, it's not accounting for what we're moving in and what services that we're. Well, hopefully we're going to move in new jobs and more manufacturing because our 2 of our states that are contiguous to us, Tennessee and Texas, do not have a personal income tax, and they've seen growth, and particularly Texas has seen growth, and Tennessee has seen growth. So why can't Arkansas?
This on job growth to produce more tax revenue.
I'm saying that that's part of the equation, but also cutting the budget has to be part of the equation, that there is no reason why we can't go in and cut the budget, just as I've done as the Attorney General. In my Attorney General's office, we've cut the budget 10+%, having to make hard decisions about what programs we should be paying for and what we should not be paying for.
Could you cut 50% of your budget as AG and still do your job?
Well, again, that would be over an 8-year period, and so I don't know. I haven't considered doing that, but certainly something that we will look at aggressively cutting more.
But that's what you're advocating in terms of cutting the general revenue budget by half in 8 years would cut half of that 70% of the budget.
Well, it's cutting half of that, but you're assuming that no money is going to come into the state of Arkansas. What a dark cloud is over your head, Roby, and you sound like one of my opponents.
Well,
I guess perhaps Sarah doesn't have to be here.
We've had 2.5% growth on average over the last 5 years, so you're saying it's going to have to be 10 to 15% growth is what we'd have to start making up those differences. I'm just saying that realistically that's never happened in the state of Arkansas.
Well, but it's time for it to. And when we have, for years that we've heard Republicans get elected because of the size of government. We've got to shrink the size of government. We have too much waste in government. We have too many people taking advantage of government programs. And I've actually saved taxpayers millions of dollars convicting more people of Medicaid fraud in the first 4 years as Attorney General than the 16 years prior to that. Is it because I'm the first woman AG or the first Republican AG, or just the first one to actually take going after criminals and those who steal from taxpayers seriously? So we've saved millions of dollars. We've saved millions of dollars on those who have gone after Social Security disability fraud, that are essentially turning in for disability that they are not should not be receiving. And so we can do it every day. Parents, these same parents that we're talking about that are having challenges with schools, every day they make hard budget decisions. Is it going to be easy? No. But neither is trying to run a restaurant when you can't be open. Neither is running a restaurant with 33% capacity. And so government's got to do what we're asking small businesses in the state of Arkansas to do and what we're asking families to do, and that's tighten our belts significantly and see what we need to cut.
I'm going to hand it back over to Chris, but I want to see your math on a piece of paper
well,
eventually
where
we see where this $3 billion cut is made up.
Well, sure. And that is absolutely fair because I think it's important to be transparent, and so we're going to be rolling out that economic plan of how we're going to make up for that. This was the initial, is to announce that we're going to do it by constitutional amendment because I believe that the people of Arkansas and not politicians should be the one to decide whether or not we have a personal income tax. That we've chipped away at it over the years, but unfortunately we haven't chipped enough away at what we are eliminating in government. Could something like universal preschool be funded in a Rutledge administration? Well, it's certainly something to look at, although we only have about a small number of kids in pre-K right now, 3 and 4 year olds. This is all of us grew up at a time when you would go to school at 5 years old. Most of our parents grew up at a time when they would go to school at 6 or 7 years old. So pre-K education with 3 and 4 year olds is relatively new in the last decade or two. So I believe that we're still seeing whether or not it's the benefit of that. I think the greatest benefit for those 3 and 4 year olds, again, goes back to these children living in poverty. And that's where most of our 3 and 4 year old education is focused on because we have programs that allow for those students whose parents are at 200+% of the federal poverty level. Preschool is available to them for free, but this also allows those littles to, again, have those meals at breakfast and lunch every single day, and a snack and a rest and a respite from living in a dangerous situation, Chris. And so I think the jury's still out on how much universal pre-K, because it's not for everyone. My daughter's 3 years old. She is not in a pre-K program, but I have several friends who have their 3-year-olds that are in daycares or pre-K programs. So I think it just really depends, and we need to see whether or not it's what we need to be focusing on in terms of our school resources.
There's been a lot of discussion about equalizing opportunities for students in Arkansas, regardless of where they come from, their economic status. How would you ensure that as the governor of Arkansas?
Well, again, I think we have to look at what the state is required to do under Lakeview, which is adequate funding, and make sure that we are providing those opportunities in accordance with law, but also that we've got to have good teachers. When we look at Northwest Arkansas and the Fayetteville School District, they have a starting salary of $61,000. When you look at schools in the Delta, they have a starting salary of close to $32,000. That's a great disparity of being able to attract teachers into those areas. And oftentimes, when you talk to those school administrators or parents, they say, well, my son's teacher has an English degree, but now she's teaching math. Well, we've already heard that you don't want either of us teaching math.
I'll teach math. I like math, so I'm good at it.
But And so I think that we need to make sure that our teacher salaries are increased, because teachers not only have such a long impact on a student's life, they're required to be so much more now. They're a counselor, they're a therapist. I remember my mom having extra clothes at school for her students. She would have snacks for her students because she knew so many of the kids. So there's extra requirements in addition to the extra training that teachers are required to do. So the first order of business is make sure we're able to recruit and retain excellent teachers. We also have to make sure that every child is given these opportunities as required by law, but it shouldn't be by law. It should be because we want those kids to have those opportunities, and we need those businesses to move into those areas, and we need to give incentives and jobs in order to get more businesses to have more of those property taxes, not higher property taxes, but more people paying taxes in those areas, so that way it'll give a better funding for those students.
There is an organization called the New Teacher Project that released a report that found too many Arkansas students are being taught by teachers who are not certified in the subject they're teaching, and they specifically pointed to low teacher pay as a primary cause. Should teachers in these high-need districts that have the greatest shortages be prioritized when it comes to pay raises for teachers?
Well, I think teachers we should have higher teacher salaries, as I've already talked about at length, and the reasons why, but we also should reward teachers who are successful. We shouldn't simply reward people because of your geographic location, but because of the productivity that you're doing with your students. Now, granted, some teachers may have a much higher poverty rate and a much higher hill to climb than others, but we should reward them by having more students passing. If we have 8th graders, again, this is a 2017, 8th graders in Arkansas were reading and math under 30% proficiency. That is not acceptable, and that should never be acceptable. Less than 30% is not acceptable. That means less than 30% of our adults have a reading and math proficiency, potentially. And because if they haven't gotten it by 8th grade, it's very doubtful that the next few years in high school that they're going to get it. So instead of looking at where you're located, we need to see what you're doing and encouraging and have an incentive program for teachers to do more and to find more innovative ways to teach those students.
Let me work in one more K through 12 question before we take our next break. School employee health and life insurance plans are experiencing some significant underfunding right now. That has been certainly a story in this legislature. It's probably something that's going to get addressed in the fall in a special session. Some policymakers are advocating that educators pay more into those plans. Some say the state should pick up the rest of the tab where the shortfall is. What is your position?
Well, I think that we need to bring together teachers and those who are paying in. My mother has, again, I keep going back to my mom because, what a great resource to have as someone who, has been able to provide for herself and to pay her bills, and she and my dad, and on her teachers' retirement. And that's what we want to encourage teachers to stay in teaching so they can get to that T-drop level and they can get to those 28 years and 30 years and to have a good retirement. But we also don't want to continue breaking the state's bank on that. And so I think that we really have to bring teachers as well as the state in and to see what works best for them. I know that it was a conversation that they tabled this last legislative session, and so they put that off from 21 to 23.
Teachers
and so
say the state should pay more. The state
Absolutely.
says the teachers should pay more. What does Leslie Rutledge say?
Well, I think that we have to find a compromise because, again, it's very difficult to recruit teachers at the low salaries that we're paying them, but that's why eliminating the state personal income tax will give them more money back in their pockets, and it will give the spouses of those educators and the parents and the aunts and uncles of those educators more money back into their pockets.
And then they can pay more for their plans. I'm just kidding.
No, that is not the answer, Roby.
All right.
Roby's not running for governor.
We're going to take another break, a short break. We're back in less than 2 minutes to discuss higher education in Arkansas, and we'll have some of your questions for the Attorney General. Stay with us.
Let's go. The war gets going, passions flowing, dreams start glowing. Let's be ready, heartbeat steady, cause the air gets heavy. The game is here, no time for fear. Can you hear the cheers?
Friday Night Touchdowns, sponsored by Baptist Health Orthopedic Center.
Well, you take a lot of pieces to a puzzle, that's the models, but the forecast is something totally different.
Barry and I will be sitting in the Weather Center and we'll look at the computer models with, wait, we've seen this before, this computer model is not right, let's follow this one over here because this has happened before.
After you've seen that a number of times, you get an idea of what's going to be severe, what we really need to be concerned about.
And that's what we do here at Channel 7. We mix that experience when we analyze all the model data.
Channel 7 News is Arkansas's #1 online source for news and weather, and your business could be just one click away. Harness the power and extraordinary reach of KATV.com, KATV Mobile, and KATV Social with precision targeting, delivering your message to your potential buyers. KATV Digital, targeted, interactive, and efficient. Contact us today and watch your business grow.
Welcome back as we continue our Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall with GOP candidate for Arkansas Governor Attorney General Leslie Rutledge. Her primary opponent, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, declined our invitation to take part in tonight's event. We'll host the Democrats on Thursday. As we move forward, let's discuss higher education in Arkansas. Attorney General, the cost of college just seems to go higher and higher each year to the point where for a lot of families in Arkansas, it is out of reach. What could you do as governor to bring down those costs, reduce the burden on students, and open up more college opportunities for Arkansans?
Well, having been fortunate enough, Chris, to attend college and go to the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville, go Razorbacks, and but my mom's an Arkansas State grad. A lot of our family went to University of Arkansas. My husband's a U of A grad. But we know the difference in what we paid for college and then watching our nieces and nephews and young folks now going to the University of Arkansas or A-State or Henderson. It's astronomical, and the student debt. And so as governor, I think that we really need to talk to our institutions of higher education and see what is the cost increase. Why are these students paying so much more? What had been $5,000 a semester is now $25,000 a semester. Well, as you said, that's absolutely out of reach. And so we want more kids, if the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville is out of reach, look at going to University of Arkansas Community College at Batesville. Look at go to U of A Morrilton. I appreciate our University of Arkansas system making sure that students that go to those two-year colleges are able to get the credits and transfer them. But unfortunately, when they go to the larger university, they're incurring the larger price tab to go with it. Student loan debt is out of control, even among my senior staff at the Attorney General's office. And again, I've been there 6.5, 7 years. Incredible team, 180 folks that work with me. And I asked some of them if they're still paying student loan debts. You would be surprised at the number of people that are senior staff level, that are in their 40s, that are still trying to pay off student loans. There is absolutely no need. We're holding our best and brightest back. And so student loans are being given away like candy at a parade and with no accountability. And we need to make certain that students are only borrowing what they need and that universities who are accepting those funds are only encouraging students to borrow what they need.
Is one of the reasons, though, for those higher costs a lack of adequate funding from state government? Should it be increased?
Well, I think when you travel around to our various college campuses, you certainly don't see a lack of adequate funding in our buildings. They're absolutely beautiful campuses, and we want students to go to a safe, beautiful atmosphere. But we also want students to be able to afford to go to college. And when we look at our in-state tuition costs versus out-of-state, it seems like a fair balance. But why at some of our public colleges and universities are students from other contiguous states allowed to have an in-state tuition? They're putting Arkansas parents at a disadvantage when you're trying to get your kid into a program and they're being up against students from Texas or California, even if it's a scholarship program, to earn a scholarship, for example, to play women's soccer. Some of our Arkansas colleges and universities and their athletic programs will only pick so many Arkansas students, and then they will go give those scholarships to out of state. Well, who do you think is going to come to a women's soccer match, even a men's basketball game? Do you think it's going to be the in-state families, or do you think it's going to be families traveling from out of state? Give Arkansas students a chance to participate, succeed, and excel.
There's been some discussion at the federal level for a few years now about free community college or free the first 2 years of college. That would require obviously some more state investment. It would obviously require some federal investment. Would you support making college free for some of those students that can't afford to go in the first 2 years?
Well, already, Roby, there are plenty of opportunities if a student is in need financially for them to be able to get grants and to work with local businesses, even if they're willing to commit to going to college and to come back and to work for that company.
And take out those loans too that you were talking
Well,
about.
they do, and they do have to take out loans at times, but I think it's important that we as adults, when someone is 19, 20, 21 years old, or perhaps they're coming back as a second career, that we, there is some accountability and buy-in. That too often we have seen people that have taken advantage of those programs and then unfortunately did not go back to work or did not finish out that degree. And so we need people as adults to buy in. So I would be hard pressed to support a free across the board, because already we offer a lot of opportunities for free, and I would like to see us focus more on our K through 12 education, to make sure that that's fully funded before we start opening up free doors to those 18 and over.
Fair enough.
Another issue for higher education, almost $3 billion in deferred maintenance needs in Arkansas right now, almost $260 million in critical maintenance needs. How would you work with the legislature as governor to address those issues?
Well, I think that when we look at maintenance needs, and we have to see whether or not they're a risk for those students, what areas are being addressed, how many students are being impacted, that works specifically, Chris, with the legislature. And that's where I think that when we have these three branches of government, that as the governor and as the chief executive, just as I've been on the executive branch for the last 7 years as the attorney general, working with the legislature, I don't tell them which laws to vote on. I tell them which laws will be upheld and challenged in court, and I weigh in on every single law, just like I'm weighing in on this educational forum. My opponent was silent throughout the entire legislative session, did not weigh in on one single piece of legislation, even though she was a candidate for governor. And so I think it's important that we work closely with the legislature to determine where those needs are and how they are being met. That as governor, it can't be a always top down, that we have to work with our local colleges and universities and the legislature to see which needs are being met and which ones aren't, and how we fund it.
Your opponent not here to speak up for herself despite our invitation. What would you say, though, are the starkest differences between you and Sarah Huckabee Sanders when it comes to education?
Well, I think when it comes to education, it's obvious tonight. Leslie Rutledge is here. Sarah Sanders is not. Sarah has been silent since she announced. And that, to me, speaks volumes. When you're dealing with the #1 issue in the state of Arkansas, 70% of the general revenue budget, 500,000 kids in our public schools, talking about school choice. I've been involved as the Attorney General fighting on school choice cases, not just in Arkansas, but across the country. I had the executive experience. We don't know how my opponent would be an executive. She's never been in a position to make decisions. She did decide not to show up and to stay silent. Sarah has been silent since she announced for governor. And so if you don't pay, you don't get to show up and ask her questions. Leslie Rutledge, I've been out and about as your Attorney General, answering questions, talking to the media, talking to Arkansans, responding to them, taking constituent questions. And so when it comes to education, I'm the only candidate on the Republican side that is public school education in the state of Arkansas, start to finish, K through 12, undergrad, graduate school, start to finish.
Let's move to some viewer questions because our hour is winding down here. This is a question about sexually transmitted diseases. We'll get a little bit of everything tonight. So with Arkansas being in the top 10 for almost all sexually transmitted diseases of youth and pregnancy rates and the high number of HIV rates among 16 to 24-year-olds, what would be your plan for sexual education in schools across the state?
Well, already we have sex ed taught and health programs taught in our junior high and high school, at least in high school, Roby. And this is a challenge when you have teenagers that we know that, teenagers are, on the cusp of being independent at 18 years old, and that we have a very high teen pregnancy rate in the state of Arkansas, and that we need to make sure that we are talking more to these teenagers and talking to them bluntly. I know parents, no one wants to have that conversation. I'm the mama of a 3-year-old. I want to wait at least 20 to 30 years to have that conversation. But
you're going to have that conversation earlier than 20 or 30 years, I promise.
That we need to speak very frankly with these kids about sexually transmitted diseases, to talk to them about the dangers of it. I mean, already they're getting a health lesson with this pandemic, and so we need to talk to them about masking up. And I think it's important to also talk about being a responsible parent. Should they get pregnant, that we want them to keep that baby and to love that baby and to raise that baby, and or to give that baby up for adoption, but to give that child a chance. Because of my work as the Attorney General, Arkansas is the most pro-life state in the United States of America, and we want children to have a chance to live. And we want to make sure that these opportunities, that kids have the education that they need.
Got a viewer question, or I'll go to another one.
Well, we did hear a lot from educators about the stress that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought about, both for students and for the institutions as well. What can government do? What could you do as governor to help struggling students and teachers deal with the psychological disruptions that they've faced, that we've all faced over these past 18 months?
It has, and that's where I think our teachers and our school counselors, God bless each and every one of them for being there for those students, for being there for one another, because our educators, Chris, not only, so many of them had the in-person instruction and then they switched to virtual instruction, and then some were having to do both. And so they were really doing two lesson plans, one to teach virtually and then one to teach in person. And so God bless them for all of their efforts. And we need to make certain that they have, through their health plans, that they have access to any mental health needs that they may have. We need to make certain that those teachers and counselors are available to students. I'm also have been concerned as the Attorney General, as the next governor, about the physical, emotional, and mental abuse that some of our kids may have faced and may still be facing. We already have too many children who suffer from child abuse, and that we have to, we encourage them to contact the child abuse hotline, and that teachers are mandated reporters. However, when those kids aren't in those classrooms, how are those teachers laying eyes on them? What if that child is suffering that we can't imagine? And so we need to make certain that with the school resource officers, with our teachers, with our school personnel, that they have the resources and the counselors have the resources to give those kids all the help that they need.
I'm going to ask my last question. If you got one after this, that's fine too. But this circles back to what we were talking about with your income tax cut plan and what your plans for education are. This viewer asks, what are you going to cut out? What are some aspects of state government that you're going to do away with or reduce sharply in order to fund education?
Absolutely, and what a fair question. And that's something that, as I mentioned, that we're going to be rolling out over the next few months of this campaign to lay out that plan. We're also going to be working with legislators that eliminating the personal income tax is going to be done over an 8-year period. It's not going to be done overnight. And so we are going to have time for each 2 years to review and to decide as we cut back. But I think there's plenty of waste in government, unfortunately. I have spent, of my 20-year career of being a lawyer, I've spent much of it as a public servant and have seen the waste firsthand. And that's why I've eliminated it at the Attorney General's office by cutting 10%.
Is there an agency? Is there a program that you would do away with?
Again, we're going to be right, and that we're going to roll that out. But I think that we need
right
sure,
now.
I know.
Just giving you the chance to say one thing right now.
Well, I think one key area that we need to look at is the Department of Human Services. That we have so many services that we provide to the people of Arkansas, but yet we have children who are that we are failing them. That are in foster care, and God bless the foster parents. We need so many more foster parents, but we are failing these children when we send them back into homes where the mother is given time and time and time again second chances, even though she's in rehab, and that they are given the opportunity to pay $8 a month rent, and they still are not making that rent payment. That we are failing those children, and so rather than doing other programs, I would rather us focus more on those children, those programs that help those children, that we can cut some of those programs. And so we'll be looking at Department of Human Services. We'll be looking at all areas where there's overlap in services. It's not enough to simply cut the number of department heads and secretaries that report to the governor. It's important for the governor to cut waste in government.
I make sure I'm understanding this clearly. You're not advocating cutting the foster children
No,
program.
absolutely
Okay.
not. No,
so that's
just
what it
to be
sounded
clear.
like.
Just to be clear,
yeah.
I want to ensure that we are taking care of those foster children adequately, because we have social workers that are being called out at 2 and 3 a.m. and helping to take care of them, putting them in foster homes, yet we are spending so many resources and taxpayer dollars being wasted on these individuals or on programs that fail time and time and time again when the state is failing those young kids and leaving them in those dangerous situations and giving the parents, the biological parents, the opportunity to fail when the state should stop.
You come to Chris and me first with your plan
Right.
for what you're going to cut.
I was going to say, friends, we will continue this debate over the budget over these next 9 months as we lead up to the primary. But that is our time for tonight. Attorney General Leslie Rutledge, we thank you for being with us and for sharing your views tonight.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Roby. And thank you to all the viewers of KATV for having this educational format. I think it's important for officials, and particularly those running for governor, to be seen, to be heard, and most importantly, to be accountable to the people of the state of Arkansas. I have been for the last 6.5 years as the Attorney General, and I will be as the next governor of the great state. And nobody is going to fight for your kids and their education more than me.
Attorney General Leslie Rutledge with us tonight. Thank you so much. Our next town hall will take place Thursday night when we'll be joined by 3 of the Democratic candidates for governor, Dr. Anthony Bland, Dr. Chris Jones, and James Russell. Candidate Supa Cypress Mays had planned to join us, but a scheduling conflict means she will be unable to participate. We hope you'll be there, and we hope you'll vote in the primary on May 24th and when we decide Arkansas's next governor, November 8th. For Roby Brock, the Talk Business and Politics team, and all of us here at KATV, I'm Chris May. Good night.